मसाले तो बहुत हैं, पर प्रकृति की गोद से खास चुने मसाले जिनकी ताजगी, खुशबू और स्वाद रहे बरकरार, ऐसे उम्दा मसाले बनाते हैं सिर्फ कैच। कैच का कोई मैच नहीं, 100%।
Excuse me, what will you do with your first salary?
So I would like to present my first paycheck to my father.
I'll buy a laptop for my younger brother.
I will save some money and with the rest I'll get an AC for my dad's room.
I'm going to start a life insurance policy. I think it's very important for my family's security.
Hello and welcome to another Power Pack weekend at the Times Literature Festival 2021. In our first session for today, we have with us Jyotirmay Sharma, Professor of Political Science at the University of Hyderabad, whose latest book, Elusive Nonviolence, The Making and Unmaking of Gandhi's Religion of Ahimsa, is a work that could change the way we assess Gandhi's contribution to the evolution of modern Indian thought. In conversation, we have acclaimed author and independent researcher Akshaya Mukul. So stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to the Times Litfest. Today we have with us political scientist Jyotirmay Sharma, who's author of 4 authoritative accounts of various aspects of Hindu nationalism. He's done book on Golwalkar, he's done book on Swami Vivekanand, and this is completely, this new book, Elusive Nonviolence, The Making and Unmaking of Gandhi's Religion of Ahimsa, has been in the works for the past 8 years, and many of us have been kind of waiting for this book forever. So to begin with, Jyoti, this is a book you have been working for 8 years. Can you please explain to ordinary readers for whom Gandhi is a very revered figure, what he's going to find, she's going to find in this book?
Thanks so much, Akshay, for inviting me to have a conversation with you today. As far as your question is concerned, what I often say is that the book is not about Gandhi. While Gandhi is the prominent peg of the book is about violence and non-violence, with Gandhi as the peg. Sure. I respect the ordinary reader a great deal. I think we still have, when we get away from the debilitating effects of social media, I still think that what you call the ordinary reader is very much a self-confident, self-critical, intellectually and emotionally secure individual. So anybody who has an interest in ideas, who revels in ideas, who loves to be intellectually challenged, would find something in the book.
Okay, thank you. What I find fascinating about the book is the way you have dealt with the central idea of Gandhian philosophy, critiquing it intensely by giving Gandhi due voice throughout the book. And this I find is a very noble method, because we have seen earlier various criticisms of Gandhi, how it has been kind of, use half-baked quotes to take him on. And what would you like to say? Were you kind of aware of this, the way this book will be dealt? Because I find that every page has Gandhi, and yet you're critiquing him intently. So if you can tell us a bit about this methodology that you adopted for this book.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. Thank you. I think if you see all my other books, I have given enough room to all the thinkers I've written on. In fact, I remember way back in 2007 when my book on Golwalkar was being released, a certain politician who was part of the panel bitterly complained that I have been fair to Golwalkar because I'm an academic. I think one needs to be fair. But to your substantive question, if I were to answer, I take Indian thought very, very seriously. And within Indian thought, I take Gandhi extremely seriously. And when you talk about the fragmentary nature of work on Gandhi, a lot of work on Gandhi, I mean, there's some excellent work on Gandhi, or Gandhian ideas, or ideas that Gandhi has a bearing upon. But this fragmentary nature is partly due to the fact that we are still so ridden with inferiority complex that we cannot stick our neck out and say, Gandhi is a serious philosopher. He is a serious thinker. Now, when you say he's a serious thinker, he has to be dealt seriously, critically, fairly. And I think all of that comes into the writing of this book. I mean, I took 8 years, 98 volumes. Luckily, I read, write, and speak Gujarati. So a lot of the translations in the collected works are not always very accurate. And one could go back and forth to the collected works. But I think the central issue is we shouldn't be coy to say Gandhi is a serious thinker. And there are many other serious thinkers in modern India. We have this tendency to say, oh, we had serious thinkers in the past, you know, Shankaracharya, Ramanuja, and so on and so forth. We go back to the ancients and so on and so forth. So I think first is to take Gandhi seriously as a philosopher, and then to say, look, I will deal with his ideas exactly as I would deal with anybody else's ideas.
Okay.
I mean, you don't have to look over your shoulder and say, oh, he's so close to us in time, so should I treat him differently? No, you have to treat him with respect. You have to treat him critically, but give him his due and acknowledge that he's important.
Okay, thank you. Also, we find that, Gandhi was constantly evolving. He had his inconsistencies and his positions regularly shifted. For instance, on the concessions he made, which you point out, even his favorite idea of non-violence. And he changed position, on interdining, various, he was constantly evolving. So was there ever one Gandhi that we know, or were there many Gandhis? And shouldn't his inconsistencies be seen in that light? So what do you have to say about that?
Fascinating. I partly answered the question in the previous answer. I think the answer lies in the fact that, what we call inconsistencies and contradictions is because one wants to see those inconsistencies and contradictions. And it's fashionable these days to say, oh, but what about the context? Yes, but there are many contexts. So are there many Gandhis? And I mean, there would be somebody who would say, my position is there are many Gandhis. But I think that's misleading. And my favorite example there is what the Orientalist literature and its fallout did to the Buddha. You see, you have today Buddhist meditation. You have Buddhist diet. You have Buddha bar.
Yeah,
you have all kinds of things surrounding the Buddha. Now you can do that, and this is a serious thing. You can do that when you disengage Buddha's metaphysics from his ethics and his psychology. If you take his metaphysics seriously, then all he wanted was nirvana. So everything else, what we call contradictions, what we call evolution, are maneuvers in order to attain this final goal, the metaphysical goal of nirvana. I believe that Gandhi is utterly consistent. he is frightfully consistent. And what one sees often as concessions or compromises or contradictions are merely small maneuvers towards reaching where he wants to reach. And in that sense, there is absolutely an invisible thread of consistency flowing through everything Gandhi does and says and writes. I think this question, which I've often been asked, so who's the real Gandhi or who's the real so-and-so, can be answered again, and I'm sort of sorry to repeat myself, when we look at not the persona or the personality, but we look at ideas. And once you look at ideas and you say, but he's saying this here, but he said something else elsewhere. Yes, but why is he saying this now? It's a kind of changing of gear in order to achieve what he wanted to achieve for himself, and what he thought he could achieve it for himself, he could achieve also for a large majority of people. So I think that's the issue.
But also the position, for instance, interdining or temple entry, if we take, did it also create so many of people who became his detractors, who were his great followers, who questioned it. And then we have this great correspondence between many people and Gandhi, where they're pointing out, look, this is what you said 20 years back or 15 years back, and what happened to you. So for an ordinary reader, how does he understand this? I fully get it that you're talking at the level of idea, not the personality. You say that it's very consistent. But on these things, and Gandhi gets judged a lot on these changing positions, on issues like interdining.
I think the moment one realizes three things. Number one, he was probably the greatest contemporary attempt, and I underline the word attempt, at what he thought was reforming Hinduism. And in that, my book argues that he found that the only way Hinduism could be reformed was to introduce non-violence and truth, and he used both sometimes interchangeably, as absolute values. That is to say, he argued, if there was no non-violence in Hinduism, there was no Hinduism. And if Hindus don't accept non-violence as radical non-violence, not wishy-washy non-violence as part of, brahmacharya, aparigraha, ahimsa, those constellations. No, radical non-violence has to be part of Hinduism. And then what you talk about interdining or various other issues are subservient to this, because he believed that these were issues which were part of the continuum of fabricating a Hinduism for himself. And sometimes there is compromise, there is sometimes a foot forward, two backwards, but in the final analysis, he's a reformer of religion. And he's an audacious, very, very audacious reformer of religion. The second thing is this, that he is often defensive. He has to deal with large masses of people. And he didn't belong to the era that we belong to, where you scream and shout and offer abuses and invective. It is amazing how civilized the tone of the most tension-ridden conversations that Gandhi has with his detractors is. And in that sense, sometimes he says things which are symbolic, which are, he says at some point, and it's there in the book, he says, my language is symbolic. I often don't understand what I say, So it's also that business of being in that public realm, being in the public glare. And finally, I think all these things that you mentioned, intertwining and so on and so forth. Let us look at the Gandhi of 45, 46, 47, 48 till he's assassinated. When he is asked definitively whether he's gone back on any of those positions that he took, he fundamentally denies that he has gone back. So if you remember in the book, I have a 1921-22 essay on Hinduism, and I have a 1947 essay on Hinduism.
Sure.
And it is remarkable how similar restatement of his articles of belief are there in these two articles separated by several decades. I go back to this position. Yes, as a public figure, he says things, goes back on certain things, reasserts certain things, but ultimately there's a frightful consistency in what he says.
Okay. And you also make a very interesting argument of not distinguishing between Hinduism and Hindutva. Can you just elaborate in detail, great detail, as much time as you can take on keeping Gandhi as a central figure? Because this might be, there's the great, the whole Gandhi, the scholarship, Gandhian scholarship. I'm sure this is going to be contested or being kind of criticized or whichever way you want to say.
Yeah, it has been over the years. No, my position is very simple. It is to elaborate on what you asked. I say that there is no distinction between Hinduism and Hindutva.
Yeah.
Hindutva is the politically dominant face of Hinduism today, though not the only face.
Okay.
I mean, that's the sentence in the introduction to the book on Hindutva.
Yeah.
It's not the only face, but it's the politically dominant face. And I'm going to repeat the same example that I gave many, many years ago in order to explain why I don't think Hinduism and Hindutva are separate, though people have all the time rhetorically want to separate it. If I were at this moment to hold a picture of myself when I was 16, I was younger, less gray, probably better looking, thinner, younger. And I would say to you, Akshay, this is the real me. What you see here, sitting in front of you and talking to you, is a diminished, perverted, sort of distorted version of the original. So don't look at me. Talk to that picture of when I was 16. Sure. I think that's a non-argument as far as Hinduism and Hindutva are concerned. Whatever we know as Hinduism, as fabricated in the 19th century, was an arbitrary invention, fabrication, creation, as religions always are. People pick and choose, depending on history, depending on context, depending on the pressures and pulls they have in life. And in that sense, if I were to say, oh, Hindutva is separate, Hinduism is separate, then where do I place the caste question in? Do I place it within Hindutva or Hinduism? And Gandhi, conscious, since you asked me to relate it to Gandhi deeply committed to removing untouchability. Whether you agree with his methods or not is a separate debate and has been going on rather well over the years. I mean, there are intelligent interventions in that debate. Where would you place caste? Would you place it within Hindutva as Savarkar defined it? Would you place it within Hindutva? Would you place Varna in Hinduism, or would you place it in Hindutva? I don't think these are issues we ought to be debating. The easy way out of this is to say it's the politically dominant face of Hinduism as we know it.
Yeah.
No great merit saying नहीं ये 19th century वाला तो ये तो कुछ और है. We will go back to the Vedas, or we'll go back to the Upanishads. That is purer. That is more refined. No, a lot of people have contributed to its evolution in various ways. You're familiar with the greats of Hindi literature, and if you yourself writing a book on, you have written a book, soon should be out, on Agaya. And I remember Nirmal Verma giving the memorial lecture for Agaya. And there is a line in that lecture which is very interesting. He says, there is no civilization which is pure.
Yeah.
It is the pure, it's the mixture of the pure and the tainted that makes a civilization. Swachh or Malin. Nirmalji's words.
Yeah.
I think this division creates a lot of problems conceptually and practically. It gives you a password to enter in this completely confusing realm of soft Hindutva.
Yeah, true. Now, let me ask you a very cliched question. What would Gandhi made out of the face of the Hindutva that we were witnessing now around us for the last 1 decade or so? And we have seen this Hindutva also change its face. And now we have a current face which is very different from what was during Vajpayee's time. What would Gandhi have made of this?
I am scared, Akshay, to be honest, about what if questions.
Yeah, I know. Therefore I said it's a cliched question.
No, it's not a cliched question. It's an important question, but I'm scared of it. I'm scared of it because there is a, if I answer it, there would be a presumptuousness in it where I would know, how somebody would react in a certain situation.
Yeah.
No, I think the question to ask in my mind is not how Gandhi would have reacted to the current situation, the current trend of politics. But the question to ask would be, are there any ideas from that whole continuum of thinkers, Tagore, Gandhi, Ambedkar, various thinkers, do they tell us something about our present condition? And there I have a slightly contentious thesis. You see, there is a tendency often to frame all these debates in the context of the colonial and the post-colonial. And since I often say I write in order to educate myself rather than anything else, I mean, that's the first motive. When if people like what I read, that's a bonus. But it's self-education. And in between the Gandhi book, I introduced and translated from Sanskrit a 13th, 14th century political satire called Hasyad, the ocean of mirth. And what I learned from that process is that we haven't become, as people would say, autocratic or totalitarian or fascist. These are the terms people use to describe if you do not like the current regime. I think as a society, if one again doesn't focus too much on the regime and its actions, but the entire society, which in a certain sense supports many things that are happening, then we have become pre-colonial.
Okay. Yeah.
Because in that 14th, 13th, 14th century political satire, there is absolutely everything, which is there today. You see, if I can take a minute more to elaborate on this, there are many political satires here, in every language. And I have more or less familiarity with most of them. I'm not saying all of them, but most of them. And most of them, almost all of them, let's put it this way, follow one trajectory. There is a golden age, there is fall from the golden age, and then a messiah or a guru or an avatar comes and redeems and reinstates and reestablishes the normative. Hasyanava is the only text I know as of now which doesn't do that.
Okay.
There is no redemption in the end. People are allowed to wallow in their misery, in their corruption. And I think the question that you asked, Gandhi was here, what would he have done or said, belongs to the other genre of political satires. In the sense, we are still looking for a deliverer.
Yeah, yeah.
We are in our DNA that Sambhavami Yuge Yuge is still there.
Yeah.
I don't think I don't put too much premium on that promise. I think we need to look at ideas which will make us more liberal, tolerant, civilized, democratic, Gandhi or no Gandhi. I think that's the challenge. The challenge is not to be nostalgic towards something, because I do believe that the current politics, the current configuration requires a counter myth, which has to be, I mean, extremely powerful, but extremely contemporary, which will take in questions of caste, gender, class into account more adequately than perhaps people before us do.
Jyoti, your book, at least to me, has been a learning and an unlearning experience both about Gandhi's key philosophy. And it's too early to say what is the kind of response, but I'm still curious to know how the scholars and we have this whole lot of Gandhian scholars and common readers. What's the kind of response that you've been getting about this book?
It's too early to get a response. I have got a few responses from people who have read the book both in manuscript form and since the book has been released. And they seem to appreciate the emphasis on ideas. I think I just hope and pray that when people start reacting, and if there is a debate, it will be an informed and civilized debate.
Yeah, but the one thing is certain, that this book is going to lead to a lot of debate in the coming days, in the coming months, because since it contests the basic idea. Not as much challenge, but it puts it in different perspective.
That's true. That's true.
And how do you think the Hindu nationalists, the nationalists who kind of never liked Gandhi, are going to take to this book, which is a very highly nuanced critique or a deep dive into Tenet of Ahimsa? Is there a fear Gandhi will go through fresh interpretation through what you say? Which I love that quote, selective quoted quotes. So how do you see Hindu right reacting? We know the kind of tempestuous relationship they had with Gandhi, and how they look at Gandhi. How do you see that happening?
No, I'm going to answer this in two parts. One is that A very wise man once quoted another wise man to me and said, never write for the living.
Yeah.
If you write for the living, you will never write honestly and truthfully.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true that the living buy your books, and one is grateful if they do so. But by not writing for the living, I mean not being self-conscious about who thinks what, when, and how.
Sure.
Because if you do that, you will either be constrained to tell the full story, or you will play to the gallery. You will become a performing monkey. And this advice was given to me when I was pretty young. I mean, I was about 24, 25 when I was given this advice, and I have meticulously followed this advice more or less consistently. So that's the first reaction. As far as selectively quoted quotes are concerned, I mean, that's been happening as long as people have been writing books. I mean, when I teach Indian thought at the university, I often ask, for instance, who said, arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached? And everybody says Swami Vivekananda. And I say to them, is this a translation of something, or he said it originally? And some of them know. They say it is a translation of Uttishta Jagrata Prapya Varanni Bodhata. At which point I say to them that this belongs to an Upanishad, the quote. And the quote actually means arise, awake, and having found good teachers, learn. Now, from the Kathopanishad to Vivekananda, how much of interpretation, interpolation, and translation has happened? And I have no problem with it. I mean, once the book is out of your hands, I think you should stop worrying. I mean, Chekhov says at some point, the moment a writer picks pen in his hand and commits it to paper, he is guilty of the most highest form of egotism, after which all that he can do is to be humble and bow. I mentioned Hasyarnava earlier, this political satire. Did Vishweshwar Bhattacharya, who compiled it, know that there would be a Jyotirmay Sharma in the 21st century who will actually read it, like it, translate it, write an introduction? There is no saying. So I think books should be left to their fate. Professor Sujit Chaudhary, the great literary critic, used to say, most books escape, only a few are released. I think I'm not bothered about misinterpretation, selectively quoted quotes. This happens all the time. A writer shouldn't do that, is my point. A writer, if he or she is honest, sincere, doesn't have an overt agenda, mustn't do it. Others doing it, it's still a free country.
And coming back to Gandhi, the personality, we are talking about the idea. Do you see Gandhi? You know, Gandhi has been it's been part of our consciousness. Is probably the only Indian whose mindscape, as you say right in the beginning about Obama and everyone else.
Yeah.
How do you see Gandhi as a person? The way he's always being interpreted. He's throwing challenge at the scholars. People are coming out as you did. So how do we see Gandhi as a person coming? You see him getting reinvented again by new set of scholars. How do you see Gandhi? Because he's been there always and he's been reinvented. How do you see it? Gandhi as a person, as an individual?
That's a very difficult question. I mean, I'm certain that if I lived in his time and got to know him, we would have argued endlessly. Yeah. And he would have argued too. Would I be in a position to convince him? Unlikely. He was an idealist, and it's very difficult to convince idealists. I think it's important that he remains a symbol. It's important that he remains a point of reference.
Yeah.
But also, in a certain sense, the question remains whether in the march of illiberalism across the world,
Yeah.
does he provide us with a sufficiently adequate vocabulary of dissent? That's the question.
Does he?
And I don't think so.
Why do you say this?
No, because I that's the burden of my book, that nonviolence is probably the greatest concept that he conceptualized. And nobody did it as effectively as he did. Along with what you talk about, his personality, his aura, his personality. But I think a problem that arises with adopting that is that it entirely, almost entirely, is situated in religion and his understanding of religion. And so even his contemporaries didn't agree with him, not because they were bloody-minded or violent people.
Yeah.
I mean, Malaviya or Lala Lajpat Rai or many congressmen at that point of time found his radical nonviolence not difficult to digest or follow or practice, not because it was not desirable, but it entailed entering a world of values which one needn't have done or one didn't need to do. You remember in the book, there is this conversation with B.J. Kher,
Yeah.
where Kher says, but Bapu, what is the problem with people being cowardly?
Yeah.
What is the problem with human imperfections? Why are you so intolerant to human imperfections? And I think there lies a clue in that sense. I mean, if the Mahabharata is a prototype of one of our great epics, it's a prototype of the world we live in. The one thing that the Mahabharata, not the Gita, the Mahabharata teaches us is all human life is imperfect. All human beings are imperfect. And we are condemned to imperfection and failure. And I think that's a theory of modesty, which we all require.
Okay. Now we're almost at the end of the conversation, but before that, I would shift gear and ask you, you are also a trained singer, Drupadya and a Khayal singer, which...
Lapsed singer.
So, and you learned from great Mallikarjun Mansoor.
Yeah.
So do we see you change gear, write something on music, say a biography of Mallikarjun Mansoor, for instance, or one of the daggers, you know, you
not change gears. I think the temptation of ideas is irresistible. But take a short break. I've been sort of quietly collecting material on a biography of Ustad Amir Khan Sahab. So that could be the next one.
Oh, that's
and of course, as an academic, one commits to writing essays all the time.
Yeah.
I once said to a very dear friend, a historian, I said, I committed myself to writing this in a moment of weakness. And she looked at me and said, but do you have any other moments other than moments of weakness? So there are essays to be written. But no, there is a book, now that I finished the quartet, about Hindu identity and Hindu self-images. There is another book which I'm reading around, but too early to talk about it because I'm myself not sure of its contours. But I would very much love to first do this Amir Khan Sahab biography. Um, and hopefully, I take 5 years to write a book. The Gandhi book
Yeah.
took 8 years, but I
It
hope
will be
this.
worth the wait. If it's Ustad Amir Khan and you're doing it, I'm sure it will be worth
Thank
the
you.
wait. Because
Thank
we
you so
don't
much.
have a biography of
Yeah.
a detailed, exhaustive biography
Yeah.
of a singer like Ustad Amir Khan.
Yeah.
So on this note, I'll thank you, Mr.
Thank you so
Sharma,
much. Thank you so
and,
much.
and thank you to Times Litfest for having this conversation.
Yes. Thank you to the Times Litfest, Vinita, everybody, the whole team. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Akshay.
मसाले तो बहुत हैं, पर प्रकृति की गोद से खास चुने मसाले जिनकी ताजगी, खुशबू और स्वाद रहे बरकरार, ऐसे उम्दा मसाले बनाते हैं सिर्फ कैच। कैच का कोई मैच नहीं, 100%।
In our next session, we bring to you Anita Nair, critically acclaimed and best-selling author of 9 novels and a short story collection. She has also published 6 books for children, 3 original audiobooks, a collection of poems, and a collection of essays. Her books have been published in over 31 languages around the world. Talking about her life, literature, and more today at the Times Litfest is Anita Nair in conversation with Kalpana Sharma, lifestyle editor at Times of India.
I would like to start by saying that it's my privilege to be speaking to the very inspiring and powerful author Anita Nair. A career spanning 25 years, author Anita Nair is counted among the most prominent writers in the literary circle. The meticulous description of the setting, the hard-hitting plots, and the beautifully shaped characters, all of this make reading her books an utter delight for readers. And in the past few years, she's forayed into the world of audiobooks and is shining bright there as well. I welcome you to the Times Literature Festival.
Thank you, Kalpana. Honored and delighted to be part of this festival.
So first of all, I would like to ask you, Eating was your last novel, physical book, but you've been working on audio originals. So please tell us, how did you get started on the very idea of writing an audiobook?
So when I started, so it came to me typically, as a commissioned project where I was asked by Storytel if I would do an audio story for them. And for me, everything, is a challenge. And, there's this very famous saying that says you should try everything once except incest and Morris dancing. So, so I said, okay, right. What I will do is I will try, because I've never done audio stories before, but I like the medium very much. Because, you can conjure up images, you can conjure up so many things just by the strength of the spoken word more than anything else.
Right.
So I said, let me give it a shot. And I did this first story, which was called Twin Beds. And this was about a couple who go away on holiday, and they just do this because they have to do this annual vacation. And they really have it's been a long and tedious marriage. And they get there, and the hotel room in Bhutan is beautiful, but it has twin beds. And it suddenly changes the dynamics of their relationship. So when I started working on that, it flowed seamlessly, the way the dialogue came in, the descriptions, the characters, and all of that. And unlike, say, when you're writing a story which is read, where the reader has the ability to go back and read again if they want to, clarify something for themselves. In an audio story, you really can't do that because the momentum is lost. So it was very challenging, but I like challenges. And so it was very exciting for me. And then once I did that story, I think Storytel also enjoyed the story, and I think they also were delighted in the kind of response it had. And I did three other stories for them, and that was called, the first one was called The Little Duck Girl. The second one was called Why I Killed My Husband. And the third one was The Field of Flowers. So, and now I'm probably going to be doing, not probably, I will be doing another 5 stories for them. So that was how I began this journey into audio stories.
So, I've heard 2 of your audio stories. That's A Field of Flowers and The Little Duck Girl. And I must say they're both very dark and really hard-hitting stories that they both touch upon very important topics. How did the idea germinate?
So one of the things that, I've been writing literary fiction, I have been writing children's fiction, and I have been writing crime fiction. So I think there's a slow development over the period where the literary fiction is all about seeking the within, pretty much, and understanding the dynamics of human relationships and so on. The children's fiction, I started finding that it was nice to be able to share stories and information where children imbibe something. And then I came to crime fiction, where I discovered that it's a splendid medium for social commentary, where I can talk about the external world and how it has an impact on the internal world of characters. So when it came to audio stories, I think it was a natural progression, an organic progression, where I thought what I want to do is look at the state of the nation, what is around us, and write about that. So, in fact, I think I'm like trying to create this genre, which is, I think, called State of the Nation, because it pretty much draws on things that is happening in our country around us, and the kind of impact it has on individual characters. So I think it's a natural progression there.
And also the entire process of writing a physical book and an audio book. What is the difference? Like, I would like to mention here, while listening to The Little Duck Girl, that entire episode, that entire scene where they're talking about doshas, the breakfast. It's so rich and it's so vivid that I completely loved it. So I would like to understand from you, how is it different? I mean, in your books also, you give that vivid imagery, but here for audiobooks, how do you treat both of them differently?
Well, with one of the, I think, striking differences between writing fiction that is to be read and fiction that is to be listened to is how you need to be very careful with the choice of words. Something as simple as using too many sibilants, so you'll have that sa, sa, sa sound, which can be grating, so I need to kind of understand the musicality of each word before I put it in. And, but otherwise, in terms of approaching character, in terms of approaching the plot, the setting, the descriptions, all of that is pretty much the same. It's just that I need to be much more careful about what I put in there in terms of, and also that you have to remember that the listener is listening, and you don't want anything else coming into their mind at that point. So I need to be very sure that it's like every sentence is like hard hitting and it registers and there's no ambiguity at all.
So also another thing, I mean, Prakash Raj, he's infused so much life and strength in the entire story. How did it really came across? I mean, you approached him. What was his reaction? Had he read your books previously? How did it all play along?
So Prakash and I have known each other for a while now, because there was at some point a discussion about him working on one of my books, where it was going to be filmed and stuff like that.
Okay.
That project fell through, but we continue to stay in touch. And on and off, we would say hello to each other. And then I was working on The Little Duck Girl. And somewhere towards halfway through the book, Prakash had messaged me for something. And I was responding to it. And then it just occurred to me to ask him if he would be, if he would like to do this, because in my mind, he was perfect as the person to read it. And I couldn't think of anybody else. The moment he just, appeared in my, let's say, my WhatsApp chat, it was suddenly like, those bell ringing, and I said, like, but Prakash should read it, so I just messaged to him. I messaged him and I said that, Prakash, I'm working on this story, and would you consider reading it? And he wanted to read the story, of course, because, he has very strong political views, and it should kind of go in with what his political views are, of course. So he loved the story, and and so we worked on that first story. And then when I was working on the second one, Field of Flowers, of course, there I had absolutely no doubt at all. Right from the beginning, it was like I knew that there was only one person who could do this, and that was Prakash.
And also, I've seen that most of your stories are set in Kerala. Is that a conscious decision for you?
So actually, with the audio stories, it's interesting. Only one story is set in Kerala. One is set in Bhutan. One is set in Chennai. And the fourth one is set in UP.
In your books, especially.
But in my books, because there's a reason for that. One, of course, is that I believe that I should be able to write, when I write, I should be able to write from an insider's point of view, with certain authority of understanding that culture, the people from there, how their minds work, so many levels of understanding that goes in. So since I am originally from Kerala, and I have a very strong connection with Kerala, and I grew up in Chennai, and now I live in Bangalore. So pretty much my stories have all been, so initially when I started writing, I knew that my first novel would definitely have to come from Kerala, because that was the world that I was most familiar with in terms of the language and culture and food and everything. So so it began with Kerala. But then when I started writing my crime fiction, which has this character called Inspector Gowda, Gowda, it's a very, Kannadiga surname. And I just had this name, Inspector Gowda. And because of that, I had to set it in Bangalore. It couldn't be anywhere else, because Bangalore is a city I know. And again, I can only write about the part of Bangalore that I live in, because I know that very well. Now, if I were to write about South Bangalore, or, let's say the CBD area, I wouldn't be able to do it, because I've lived in Northeast Bangalore, and that's what I like to write. So it's pretty much about writing about the places I know. I think the only departure I made was with A Field of Flowers, which I set in UP.
Yes. So, is there any form of, apart from audiobooks, any other form of digital literature that has intrigued you and has kind of caught your attention? Like there are these stories delivered through SMSs and stories written for apps. Anything that you find, after audiobooks, something you'd like to try your hands at?
Actually, the only thing that I really want to do right now, the only genre that I want to write is a graphic novel.
Oh, wow.
Because, I think pretty much I've written every form, and I know what I like about it and what I don't like about it. So definitely I am a very hardcore book writer, more than anything else. I like books. I love books. I love audio because it's a different medium. It has nothing else to it.
Right.
And apart from the words and the voice, two things that keep it going. But I do really want to try and, let's say, do a graphic novel at some point, maybe an adaptation of one of my own books. I don't know.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
And also now let's move on to your physical books. You've always written books that have complex situations, women fighting for their rights. And so how much of your books come from a personal space?
So I think in many ways, it comes from a space of um, not able to comprehend why this is happening.
Yeah.
So when I start, so I grew up in a fairly liberated household, as in like I had an older brother, and everything that my brother did, I also did. There was absolutely no restrictions on what I can do, probably because my brother went with me everywhere. So what happened was that I grew up and I went to a co-ed school. I had a lot of male friends growing up. I continue to have a lot of male friends and so on. So I grew up never realizing that the way the world saw men and women was a very different, it's a very different perspective. So it was only when I emerged into, like, say, my teens and so on, that I started realizing that women are seen differently. Because until then, as a child, I did whatever my brother did. The moment I became, a woman, typically, as they say, um, I started realizing that there were these restrictions that were being imposed, even in my household. And that began to bother me, because it was like, my brother can do this, why can't I do this?
Yeah.
And so I think that seed of anger, that seed of rebellion, all of that was sown at that point. And then when I started writing, I constantly find how women are treated differently all the time. And it's not just in India, it's also abroad, in the Western world as well. Even in the so-called first world nations.
Yeah.
You find that patriarchy has this huge way of either it's very obviously done, like in India, or it's insidiously done, like in the rest of the first world. So I then began thinking that I should start addressing this, start writing about it, because I think somewhere in me, deep inside me, there's also this person who's very angry with all the injustice that's happening in the world. But I'm not the kind of person who can get out into the street and raise my fists and say those things, because that's not who I am as a personality or a character. My form of fighting is with words and through my stories. And one of the things that I've always wanted to do is that whatever I write, I believe that it should leave a residual message, not as a message, but couched as a story. It should make my readers think, make them evaluate their own lives, make them evaluate what is happening around them. And so that's where it comes from. So the personal space, yes, obviously, like even as a woman who's been married a very long time and has a family and everything, I see the things that unconsciously that probably my husband or son says, and they don't even realize that what they're saying is not. It's just smacks of gender bias, and so it makes me think that for me, I live in a household where everything is talked about, everything is discussed, and so on. What about people? And even I feel this, resentment burgeoning in me. So what about people who don't even have the opportunity to speak up? So what happens to them? So in a strange way, I think I'd like to give with my books, I'd like to kind of instill a sense of strength in my readers, whether it is a man or woman, it doesn't matter that way. So that's been my only, I would say, underlying agenda. There's no other agenda.
Also, some 10 years ago in an interview, you had said that male and female authors are viewed differently. Do you still feel the same?
Absolutely. Because I think, that, so it's like I always tell my editor about this, and I tell her that, when a woman writes, let's say, a dark novel, what happens is it's still considered women's writing, which has to be kind of contained within the four cornerstones of grahastha. But when a man writes, it's immediately seen as this very, weighty tome with a lot of gravitas about the condition of the world and stuff like that. So it's not even, I don't think actually, and here the thing is, I don't think the readers do that. I think it's actually the literary establishment who sits around demarcating these things. And obviously, if that is what is being fed, via social media or through, media, what happens is that unconsciously the reader also starts seeing it in that way.
So what is your entire process of writing? Because you've been constantly writing books, now audiobooks. So, that ideation and the entire writing process, what is it like for you?
Okay. So usually what happens is that I have I have at any given point of time, I have some 8 ideas buzzing in my head. And then what happens is that there's one idea. It's pretty much like the journey of a sperm, So it has to defeat all the million sperm to get there. So one idea kind of shoves aside all other ideas, and it kind of starts banging inside the wall of my skull or whatever, demanding to be let out. So then what happens is that I kind of slip into a state where all I'm doing is just thinking about that particular idea. And what I also do is I feed it by reading on that subject as much as I can. So for instance, when I was writing, let's say, The Field of Flowers, I was reading so much about wrestling and, about growing gladioli and everything. Because all of that brings in, I would think a certain understanding, which I can internalize. And then when I write, it all appears seamlessly. So that is the process. And then one morning, I know suddenly that I have to get down to work. So I still write longhand. So there is the book that has to be the perfect notebook to write in. It's all about touching and feeling and stuff. I'm a very sensual person that way, in the sense I like to touch and feel and smell everything. And, I know what the taste of paper is. So, but apart from that, so then I start writing. And I write longhand, and it just goes on till I finish. And then that's my process. And then I key it in and so on.
So out of all the books that you have written so far, which has been your quickest work and which took a long time to actually come along?
Okay, the quickest book was Alphabet Soup for Lovers, because it came with an inbuilt architecture. So, I knew that it had to contain within that much of, 26 letters. And so it had to have only 26 chapters, and each chapter should, like a letter on its own, except for A, has no other meaning, right? So I only could give it so much of space. So there's an inbuilt architecture to that. The longest book that I took the longest to write my historical novel, which is called Idris, Keeper of the Light. Because that was like tomes and tomes and tomes of research, more than anything else.
So also I'm curious, you were in advertising. When did you decide you want to become a full-time writer?
I worked in advertising for several years, but then sometime in 97, I decided, 96, sorry, I decided that I didn't want to work full-time in advertising anymore. But at the same time, I didn't want to be a full-time writer. There was this huge block in me that stopped me from just saying that, okay, I'm going to try and live off my writing now. So I continue to work in advertising, but more on a consultancy basis, and, where I did like 3 mornings a week and that kind of thing. So I did, my first novel came out, The Better Man came out, and I was still working in advertising. And I remember that I already started work on Ladies Coupe at that time. And so I'd almost finished Ladies Coupe and The Better Man had come out. And there was this really very, very lot of reviews and very flattering reviews and everything. And then there was this one particular morning at work where I had a client meeting, and the previous, this was a Monday, I remember that so distinctly because Sunday, the New York Times review of books had carried a really massive review of The Better Man.
Okay.
And that's like there. And then I go for this meeting, and this is a public sector client who sits there and says, Anita, I don't like this comma here. And I was like, why am I doing this to myself? This is like punishing myself, really. So I made this decision at that point that I was going to quit. And I was going to just try and see if I could. I'd saved enough money to, live off my writing for about a year or so. So then I said that let me, try and do this. So I remember coming home and my parents were visiting at that time. And I told my dad, like, I'm going to quit. I put in my papers and I have like a month's notice now to finish. And he said, what will you do now? And I remember my mother like hollering from the kitchen and saying, oh, she's married, there's a husband, he'll look after her. And I said, no, I've never done that. I've never let anybody look after me. I've been very steadfastly independent. And I said, I'm going to try. I have enough money saved for a year to try and, live off my writing. If it doesn't happen, I'll go find myself another job, but I am not going back into advertising. And by the time I was sick and tired of it, and I think also my ego was bruised with all these various altercations with clients. And so I remember telling my dad, I said, look, I'm going to go to a sari shop and ask them to give me a job. I just want to be a sari sales girl because I don't need to advertise. You just take the sari and hold it up. They like it, they take it. If they don't like it, they just leave it and go, I could remember the horror on my father's face because, typical middle-class family where he thinks like his daughter should have a proper job and not be be a sales girl and stuff like that. So I did this. So May 1st, 2001 was was the day I quit advertising. So that April 30th was my last day. And I always found it funny that on Labor Day, I was unemployed. and then Ladies Coupe came out like a couple of weeks later. And that book just kind of changed my life in the way it was accepted, the way it was published. To this day, it continues to, be talked and discussed and reviewed and all those things. And it also, I think more than anything else, it gave me that confidence and that strength of conviction that, yes, this is what I should be doing. And that's what I will do.
Your entire writing journey, Ladies Coupe, just outshined. That's one book everyone remembers when your name comes up. So what is that one reader review or anything that really, really touched your heart and made it, your resolve to be a full-time writer stronger?
Well, there are a couple of things that I'd like to talk about. One was, of course, that I found that once Ladies Coupe came out, that there was this huge word of mouth that was happening more than anything else. It was like a secret underground among all women readers. It was like people were discussing it and talking it, and it had a life of its own, actually. But so the first, when I finished writing the book and the first copy reached me, my mother was at home at that point because I told you, I just told him 2 weeks before that I was leaving work and everything. So my mom read it and then she said, I like it, but you told me it's going to be published abroad. What will they understand of it? I said, we don't know. We'll just, whatever they understand of it, they'll understand of it. And then later, the next year, I was traveling in Europe and I was doing a lot of these book readings and stuff like that. So there would be somebody reading in Spanish or in French or in Italian or whatever. And what I discovered was at the end of every event, there would be like 3 or 4 women who would be like waiting very patiently for me to finish with whatever. And then one of them would come and tell me inevitably, this is my story, but how did you know it? You know? And it would like hit me that in some strange way that I managed to transcend all barriers of nationality, culture, everything. It was just one human being speaking to another human being. And that was all that was connecting me to this millions of readers around the world. And that kind of made me realize that, yes, there is a certain power that is vested with the writer, and I need to use it consciously and carefully. So it made me that much. So if you see that journey now leading to this State of the Nation stories began there, because with my first novel, it was a look within. But with Ladies Coupe, I started looking at the world and the impact it has on various people. So thereafter, I think in my head, I became very certain that what I wanted to write about, no matter what genre or what form it takes, is definitely the human condition.
Yeah. And one thing that you feel, is your innate quality as a writer that makes you so popular. What do you think it is?
I think basically I don't flinch from writing anything. I don't worry about how I am going to be viewed as the writer of that, whether it's writing about food, whether it's writing about landscape, whether it's writing about very dark spaces in people's minds, or whether it's writing about sex. It doesn't matter to me. I approach everything with the same way of doing it, basically that it has a role to play in the story. And only if it has a role to play in the story will I put it there. So I think that allows people to also connect with my characters at a level which is very human. They don't feel that, they don't measure up, or they don't feel that, oh, these are not characters I can relate to. It becomes like, all, it's like, this is who I am, and the characters are there, and we connect.
Okay. So before we end, I would like to ask you, when is your next book coming? When can we expect the next book?
So I have my first collection of short stories, Sato of the Subway, is coming out as an audiobook very soon. So that is coming out. And I've just finished writing my third Inspector Gowda novel. And I'll be very happy to share the title here. It's called Burden of Proof.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So, first time on Times Litfest.
Yes. First time ever. Nobody knows about it. Burden of Proof. It's called.
Wow. Look forward to reading your books, and thank you so much for joining us. It's always a delight to read your books, and today, obviously, a bigger delight to actually talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalpana. It was a lovely discussion, and I'm so glad that we were able to do this, where you have such a clear understanding of my work, and that is something that an author hopes for in any interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
मसाले तो बहुत हैं, पर प्रकृति की गोद से खास चुने मसाले जिनकी ताजगी, खुशबू और स्वाद रहे बरकरार, ऐसे उम्दा मसाले बनाते हैं सिर्फ कैच। कैच का कोई मैच नहीं, 100%।
Our panelist for today's last session is Nikita Singh, renowned author of 12 books. In her latest collection of short fiction titled What Do You See When You Look in the Mirror, Nikita explores the secret inner lives of her characters as they grapple with love, loss, grief, and mental health. Asking her some profound questions is author and academician Harshali Singh.
Good evening, everybody. I welcome you today to the session Reflections and Romance with the very talented and celebrated author, Nikita Singh, at the Times Litfest 2021. Romance novels have always given value to women's innermost desires because, frankly, women have very rich inner lives. Now, I usually read romance novels for their happy endings, especially the stories which are fun, witty, and with mature love, with courtships and which have family strife. A lot of books portray women in a way that serves the male character's journey. So romance for me is full of women's voices and women's stories. Of course, there are male and non-binary authors now, and romance is no longer about a man and a woman. So there is more love to go around. And romance authorship may be the arena least dominated by straight men in the entire world. But that's just my take. Nikita, what about the romance genre appeals to you?
I think I've always liked to read about relationships that people have with others, and of course, like with themselves, with their environment, their society, and all of those things. So romance is just a part of that. It is the love that you feel towards somebody else, and how you show that.
Yeah.
And so when you read romance novels, I don't know how to put it in words, which doesn't bode well for me as a writer. But yeah, when you read romance novels, you can escape reality. You can escape. It's a little piece of emotional journey that you can just experience with yourself. And I think that people, when they read books, they want to read about themselves and they want to see their reflection in the words. And even if the story has nothing to do with them and it's not about their lives, it's the emotions that the book invokes in you that is what people crave. So when I read romance novels, I want to feel emotions and I want to go through this journey. And I've always loved them. I've always, ever since, I think the first romance novel I read was probably when I was 16 or 17. And ever since then, it's always been a pleasure.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say guilty pleasure because I'm trying to get rid of that word, because why should I feel guilty about something that makes me happy? But it's always been a pleasure.
Yeah, and then I feel that, books don't really need to be sad or challenging to be worthwhile. So when I read a romance, I usually do it to replenish my stores of good feelings and to remind myself that stories can end happily, and that people can fall in love and overcome their individual differences and find a way to be together. So I remember, as you were just talking about your first book, I remember the first book I read was, Love Story by Eric Segal, which really left an impact on my mind. And that was the benchmark that kind of set within me, wherein I realized that romance novels can be funny and yet can be tragic. And so when I do my own writing, it's like, and that's the expression that comes out. Which authors have influenced your narrative?
I think I've always kind of absorbed a lot of things from a lot of different authors. I don't think that my romance writing has been influenced by a romance writer. I think
Yeah.
it's just um, because you when you first start writing, all the framework that you have is from all the books that you've read. And I
Yeah.
read a lot of romance novels and I was reading them a lot. So then organically that sort of like was my first book, and then one thing led to another, and then step by step there were a few more love stories. And then um, as I gained more life experience, the stories kind of changed and had more elements to it, more dimension to my characters and the plots and all of that. I think the writers that I love to read are the ones that, again, like capture what's going on inside someone's head really well, not just what it appears to the to others who might witness them. So right now, I have been reading a lot of Neil Gaiman, and he doesn't write about romance, but he writes about relationships that people have. Because at the end of the day, I feel like all fiction novels are about relationship with self,
Yeah,
with others, with the environment that you're in.
Uh,
So Neil Gaiman, I was obsessed with all through 2020, like all through COVID times. I was just one after the other reading all of his books. Um, and then I've always liked Thomas Bernhard and James Baldwin. And right now, I just bought 3 more books last night, and then just randomly at a grocery store at a Target, I saw it and I got it. But it's like those are thrillers. I bought Leanne Moriarty has a new book, and Lisa Joel has a new book, and I didn't know that they were coming out with new books, so I just picked those up. So I am open to being influenced by anyone. So,
anyone.
Yeah.
No, I get that. I completely feel you there. So when you do write your own books, do you take your own experience as the starting point when you're writing, when you start writing?
Not usually, no, because all of my books so far, apart from this most recent one, have been completely fictional. And I think sometimes I just observe things, and they don't even have to be things that have happened. Sometimes something else happens, and I kind of build on it, and something happens to somebody else, or in a movie, or maybe a song makes me feel a certain way. And then I want to evoke that emotion with a fabricated set of circumstances that it's all imagination from then on. So it's in pursuit of invoking that emotion.
Right. So it's basically questions or any thought or observation, and whatever you've absorbed from your environment that kind of finds its way into your writing.
Yeah. So for The Reason Is You was one of my most recent books, and in that, just the one liner, just the one thought that I had was, what if what is it like for somebody to be in love with or be in a relationship with someone who's going through depression because of loss and they're grieving. And then I took it one step further, and I was like, but what if they're not like in love, they just were on a first date, and then they get the news that her father has passed, and then he was there, so they formed this close bond, and now they're 6 months later, a year later, they're still in a relationship, but they didn't even really like each other. They were in the middle of a date, and it would have gone so differently. They might never have seen each other. So, and then I was testing the boundaries of a traditional monogamous relationship as to how his ex comes back into his life, and then questioning what matters more, like loyalty in the traditional term, or if that person who came back into his life is going to be the person that he spends the rest of his life with. Isn't it better to end this now than to keep this going? And then so it was all of these different questions, so like complicated layers that form, but it starts with one idea and then you kind of build on that.
Yeah, wonderful. So as a reader, I mean, you said you read everything, and there's no particular genre that you kind of limit yourself to. But this question, in fact, really, it's a very interesting question to me. I don't know how you'll take it. But when you're about to write your books, do you read a lot of romance? And what do you think is like the secret portion of a good, enjoyable romance? Do you have like a formula that you follow, or something in your mind that you've already, a framework that you've set up for yourself, something
I think
like
when I
that?
start writing, I don't do much in terms of research, because I think it comes from this insecurity, or I don't know what the term would be for that, but I feel like I'm very good at copying somebody's voice. So
Okay.
I want to stay away from romance as much as I can, because I feel
Yeah.
like then I'll write their story instead of
Yeah.
my own.
Yeah.
Because if I'm reading something, that's how my voice will become in my writing very easily.
And,
So
and it
I
kind of
don't.
inevitably seeps into your own writing.
Right.
Yeah.
Their vocabulary, the way that they form dialogues, and the way they've broken down their chapters, all of those things just assimilate. And then
Yeah.
I don't want that. So I actually try to stay away from books that are similar to mine, or similar to the one I'm writing. But I do read a lot, because I think it's important to just have words, just be reading words, because you're going to be sitting in front of an empty Word document, and you have to put words on that. So it feels really daunting when you feel like there are no words. So when you're reading something that's completely not about what you're writing, that can be really helpful. So that's kind of what's worked for me so far.
Yeah. So I'm going to, kind of hit it off from what you just said. Have you ever felt those dreaded 2 words of writer's block?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Before this book, I hadn't written anything for 2 years. But my writer's block looks a little bit different, because once I start writing something, I will finish it. But it's the sitting down to write that takes me forever. I will, I will not. Because I'll make it such a mountain in my head, and then I would think that, okay, I need all the stars to align. I think I need everything to be falling in place. I need to have time. I need to not have an important project going on at work. I need to be alone. I don't want anybody else here. And like that, finding that chunk of time. And then once you have that, then you're like, why now you have to write, but then you can't just like summon creativity.
Yeah.
You can't schedule it. So then it just leads to me thinking that maybe I can't do it anymore. Maybe I'm not a writer anymore, or something. It's and then looking at the stack of the books that I've written before, I think that it feels like a fever dream. Like I don't remember doing it. So it's a lot. But once I start writing, I think that's another reason why my writer's block can be so intense before I sit down, is because once I start writing, I write so fast. I will always finish my book within 2 or 3 weeks. Just my first draft will be out on paper, just the whole thing. So there is no time for writer's block once I'm in the flow. But to get there is so hard.
Just sit on that table.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was thinking the other day, that within the last 20 years or so, there has been a steady shift towards novels that are more accurately reflect the diversity of our readership now. And readers are now demanding more representation and inclusivity within their romance novels, or any kind of writing work in general. And many authors like you have taken up that calling. But do you think, in your view, has the expression of romance only, because we're in that session, has changed over the centuries for you? I mean, since you've read, you read a lot. So have you seen there a shift of writing in romance over the centuries?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was, I mean, of course, all books are the product of their environment, circumstances, atmosphere, whatever's going on around them in the world. So that's been the obvious shift. But I do feel that in terms of the content inside the book, I think it used to be a little more dramatic and a little more romantic in that way. Now there's more of a realistic element to it, because there was a time, maybe 10, 15 years ago, all the movies were saying, oh, this is not a romance novel, this is not a love story, like all that stuff, because it got a bad rep, because nobody could relate to that. There was such a gap between those things, what you see on TV in a movie, or what you read in a romance novel versus what was going on in the world, because nobody's living that single-minded, this is what I want and this is all I want kind of life, like all or nothing, do or die, like the whole thing. And so now there's more of those. So we're writing about complex characters who have more than one desire. They want things for themselves, they want things for their career, their family, their society, like all of those things. So we see more of a level-headed kind of approach to it.
More practical, yes. More
Right.
practical and realistic,
Right.
So I'm going to come to your new book now. And, your new book, what do you see when you look in the mirror, is a collection of 15 short stories. And the thread that ties them all together is basically unmasking one's innermost emotion. And the characters in all the stories are in fact embracing their feelings, or they're confronting them, essentially owning those feelings that they have, or the emotions that you wanted to evoke in that story. So what was your inspiration behind this book, and why did you feel the need to write it?
It was such a, people always think that novels happen, that you sit down and you plan it and then it happens. It's such a process, and it's so erratic the way it happens, because the first story, Together Forever, was a story that I thought of years ago. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I thought that maybe a young couple decides that they're going to die together when it's time for one of them. And then what if when it's time, one of them isn't ready? And what happens then? And then I started thinking about, what if the person who's dying, who has whatever illness, is thinking back to their life 30 years together, or however long, and thinking about it in a certain light. And then once they pass, maybe the other person is thinking about the same events from their perspective. So right. So that's what I was thinking. And that's where the idea of inner lives came, about how like you can live the same life. And we always talk about how people who grow up in the same household, siblings, can end up so different from each other, even though they have the same nurturing that they got. So their nature changes. So anyway, so that was the initial thought for that story. And then I started thinking about more stories, like I think one of the first ones was also the watering can, where this kid has to foster 2 plants and keep them alive for a month. That came from my cousin. So it was so fun too, because I have cousins who are 4 and 10, and I love their relationship. And then the way they talk, the way they think is so different from anything that I would think. So slowly I started putting these stories together, and then I found that the common theme was, you can never tell what's going on in someone else's head. So it became about inner lives, it became about mental health and your relationship itself, and what do you see at the end of the day when you peel off all the layers, and it's just you in the mirror, like who is that person, how much of it that person is you. So those ideas, and then I thought about more plot points, and then it developed sort of that way. And it was such a fun book to write. It was difficult. I cried a lot. So many stories, I just sit there and cry, and then I was like, okay, now that I've had a good cry, let me let me go back.
That's what I wanted to ask you. Was it like a cathartic book, or was it like the stories are collected over time, as you're saying that they were? And
some of them are definitely even stories that I wrote earlier. Maybe in my grad school, I wrote a couple stories that are in here, and I kind of left them untouched because I wanted the stories to all have their own voice, because they're about different people from different perspectives. So I wanted that to come through. And I honestly had so much fun writing this book, because it just felt like such an experiment, and I felt so free. Not because when you're writing a novel, you have an intention in mind, and you have an ending in mind, and you want everything that the character says or does to be aligned with who they are and how they would react to a circumstance. But with this, because you don't have to provide a 360 view of anybody, because it's short stories, it's very short, you don't That's a difference between novels and short stories. With a novel, you have to know your character fully, and you have to know how they would react to something. Oh, that's not what they would say. What would they say? Like that kind of stuff. But with a short story, you just have to zoom into a scene and then zoom out, and that's it. So you can write anything and not have to follow through. So you can make really erratic characters, and you don't have to do it for a long time. So you can keep that up. So that was so fun for me. And it was difficult because a lot of these stories come from personal experiences, things that I've seen, things that have happened to me, and all of these things. So it was hard, it was fun, it was a whole thing.
No, in fact, Together Forever actually gave me goosebumps, and Made for Each Other was such a real story. And you're very right, because while I was reading through the stories, I really felt that that is where the question came from, that did you collect these stories over time? Because there is such an innocence to a few stories, and then there is a complete maturity in another one, and then you are like, okay, what happened here? So that was such a wonderful thing to do, to not touch the stories that probably you wrote at a very young age, and then leave them as it is. But is there a story or sorry,
the story that you brought up, Made for Each Other, and then the next one, How Would They Know? They're connected. And that story is Made for Each Other is my agent's favorite story, and he wanted that to be the first story. And I was afraid because I thought that people always assume that the first story or like your novel is about you. And I thought that people would think I'm so vapid and so shallow, I only care about myself. So no, but then that's the beauty of a collection, because you can go into this person's mind and write whatever you want, and not have people think that that's you, because you have 15 other stories. I can't be all of them. So it was so interesting to write this person who's just only thinking about herself and what she can get from this relationship and all that stuff. So
what you said is very true, because in my second book, Anatomy of Choice, I write about a threesome. So when I was, kind of on a book tour, I had people come up and ask me that, is this coming from personal experience? I said, no, everybody doesn't have, everything doesn't have to come from personal experience. You can actually just question something and then want to, kind of figure out how that would work in the scenario that you live in. But is there sorry?
It's called imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I said. I said every serial killer, person who's writing a serial killer is not one in themselves, right? So why question, people who write romance or erotica or things like that?
Right.
But the question that I wanted to get to was that, is there a story or a character in the book that that is like your favorite? I know, all the stories, they're all our babies, and we love them all equally. But there's always one, as you said, is there one character or a story that you really find, that, you were really satisfied with and completely loved?
I think Together Forever ended up being, I put that first also because I had that in my mind longest. And it was very difficult to figure out how to end that. And I went in thinking that the story was going to end a certain way. But by the time I arrived at that ending, I was just feeling so bad for that character, Sher, that I couldn't do it. I had to change the ending. Then The Watering Can is about my cousins, and those are my favorite characters.
Yeah.
But then there's Talking to Strangers that I really like. Good for Nothing is really close to me. Guru is a letter that I've written to my teacher. So I don't think that there's like one character that I can narrow down, but I do have my favorites in terms of what stories that I like.
All right. So, coming to the kind of love that we are hearing about more and more often nowadays, do you think is it like, are you likely to find sustainable love or a relationship which will last over Tinder or online and similar apps like that?
I think that the dating apps are just there to facilitate two people meeting.
Yeah.
And it can be really frustrating, especially right now with COVID and even before that, when you have this like structured life, you go to work, there's a certain set of people that you work with, and then you come home and then or go somewhere. Maybe like I don't know how active everyone's social life is, but nobody is meeting as many people as they were in college or in school, because you go out and you have hundreds of people around you. So it's not the same when you're working with the same group of people all the time. So I think the dating apps are just a way to facilitate you meeting somebody new. And when somebody is ready to find a partner, it can be very frustrating to organically try to meet someone and you narrow down your pool to the neighborhood or whatever that might be. So I think that it's a great way to meet people, because I think more than ever, even with all the social media and probably because of that, people are so disconnected from each other, and people feel isolated. And if you're ready for something and you feel like it's time, then it's great to have a platform to actually do something about it rather than just sit there and wait, because that
We're all
you know,
looking for companionship.
right.
Yeah, and something might just work out. I mean, we all know of people who found their ever afters on these dating apps. So why not?
Yeah.
So a couple of years back, I was I was in a conversation with someone, and they said that that romance is very regressive and it's all about sex, and so where's the empowerment? Were there any challenges that you faced when you started writing, and do you face these problems even now after having written so extensively, or has that changed?
I'm curious how you respond to those people when they say those things.
I smile.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of the times the opinions like that come from people who don't even read romance or haven't even read. So a lot of people will walk up to me and say, "Oh, why don't you write whatever other genre?" And I say that there are thousands and millions of books written in that genre. So why don't you just read that? You can't change somebody else's life to fit your idea of what I should be doing. So as far as romance goes, honestly, I just can't understand why people can't just let others do what they want to do with their lives. I would never walk up to a computer scientist and tell them to not work in computers and work in electricity now or whatever. So, people just think that it's their right. So, one, I have a problem with people telling others what to do. And two, as far as like romance being regressive, I don't think that that's true, because I mean, of course, it's subjective. It depends on what's been written in that particular book. But I think when you talk about sex, it's also a tool of empowerment for a lot of people, because we are so oppressed as a society when it comes to even talking about sex. So there's that. Also, when it's a woman or writing the novel, the fact is a novel is a proof that this person has a voice and agency and authority over this. So like that in itself is the opposite of regression. So yeah, it's just, you could argue about this stuff all the
time,
all day long, but at the same time, I don't need to justify my choices to other people, because I don't expect them to justify their choices to me either. It's
Absolutely.
very,
I mean, that is one of the reasons I don't get into any
you
conversations
just
with people
smile.
like this, because frankly, I feel romance is the last place that reduces women. In fact, I feel romance kind of it shows how women come into themselves more fully. I mean, she is discovering strength and independence and vulnerability and bravery and honesty and fighting a war, or to be proud of who she is as an individual. Where else would you find that?
Yeah.
And so that has to be celebrated, and somehow people are just not able to probably get that.
For a
So
lot of people also, being vulnerable means weakness, because it's tough to hide all your emotions. But it's right, again, like I don't need to talk to those people. We clearly have different views, so we can just agree to disagree. You can think a
Yeah,
certain thing and I can think something else, and that's fine.
absolutely. So, what would be the three things that you would tell a young writer who has just begun this journey, or somebody who aspires to publish their work? Would there be any three or four things that you kind of, because you've written so much and you have a
Mhm.
huge body of work, and you've
Yeah.
obviously experienced, you've gone through all the hiccups that one goes through. Would there be like two or three things that you'd like to kind of help them with?
I was in another panel just yesterday.
Mm.
We were talking about the same thing, and then she was asking me what I would say to people who worry about money and how can they make this a career, is it viable, and all of that. And all I could think was a young person thinking about writing, and they claim that, oh, I love this so much, I want to be a writer, but then they want to already know that it's going to be a lucrative career and
Yeah.
a profession, a lifetime profession.
Yeah.
And that just feels like such an unnecessary weight to put on your own shoulders. Because if you so enjoy writing, then sit down and write. Why are you saying, why are you asking yourself, and why are you saying all
Weighing the
these things
options.
to yourself that are making you feel diminished, and they're making you feel like you have this mountain to climb? Why are you thinking about a profession of like 20 years or 30 years or whatever, however long? Why don't you, if you love writing so much, why don't you sit down and write whatever you want to write? And then the second thing would be to, what do you want to write? A lot of times the people want to become a writer, but I think you should write when you have a story to tell, not just you can't just write a book for the sake of writing a book,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it won't feel, you won't feel it, so others won't feel what the heart in that book. um and third would be sort of just to read a lot, and maybe not restrict yourself to reading a certain genre, or reading a certain kind of book that you think that your book is similar to, because you have to experience all of these things, and you have to learn the format, because um, a lot of the times people write their first book and expect it to be the best work that they've ever done, and everybody should love it, everybody should appreciate the fact that I wrote a book. But okay, it's great job, you did a wonderful job, you wrote a book, but at the same time, what's in the book? And that is important. And with any other profession or any other career, you wouldn't expect somebody's first try to be a masterpiece. So why is that with a book? No one has ever taught you this, so this was your first attempt, this is the first pancake, you have to keep going, and you have to,
Going.
yeah, just without
So
putting a bunch of pressure on yourself.
yeah, so wonderful. So as a writer, has there been a change in your process of writing from when you wrote your first book, which was Love at the Rate of Facebook, and to the new book? What do you see when you look in the mirror? Has there been, what has been your growth or evolution that you yourself can probably validate?
I think a lot has changed since then. Back then, I had nothing to lose, because I definitely didn't set out thinking I was going to build a career out of it. I
Yeah.
was just writing a story that I was reading a lot, and I thought that I had this one story that I wanted to write. So then I wrote it. And then it fortunately did really well. So then I wrote another one. And so I was doing it on the side for fun, but also it was my main and only source of income. So it was great that the books were doing well. But then I think I got to a point when I was 22 and I had 6 books, that I realized that this can't be it. Like I I don't know everything, and I want to learn, and I want to not, box myself into this uh, so early, and I want to do other things, and I want to travel, and I want to meet new people and learn about writing. So then I applied for a master's in fine arts, and then I moved to New York for that, and then I went to school. And um, I think there they don't teach you how to write because it's a master's program, so
Yeah.
they won't teach you the basics, but they do have these seminars where you read the same book as everybody else that week, and then every week we have the seminar where for 2 or 3 hours, whatever the duration of the class was, we talk about that book. And then that's when I learned how to be a good reader and notice things that I wouldn't normally notice, and then other people were pointing that out, and I realized, okay, this is what the book is about for this person. And so once you become a good reader, I think that brings you closer to becoming a better writer, because it is about empathy, it is about observation, it is about just understanding that not every brain works like yours, so people will get different things out of it. So I think that's when the biggest shift happened in my writing. I kind of slowed down. I limited myself to one book a year because that felt more my pace at the time. And then last year was the first time that I didn't publish a book because I was working on this one, and I needed time, and I thought that it was fine to do that. And I always say that my books in the 2010s would be very different from my books in the 2020s, because that was a decade of my life, my first decade as a writer, and I did 12 books and some short story collections and some books under a pen name. So 15 or 16, whatever. That's my 20s. And now I just turned 30 last week. So this is going to be different, and in an exciting way. But then when people ask me if I would go back and change anything in my old books, I wouldn't, because that was how a 19-year-old thought. That was how a 22-year-old thought. And that I can never get back. That's a time capsule for me. So it's just a journey. It's all these steps. And I was never aiming for something. I still am not aiming for something. I just take it one book at a time, and I want to make it the best book that I can. And I think it took a long time to get there, because when I was younger and I had all these voices in my ear, because when you're a young girl, people will not take you seriously. People will always come and tell you, don't do that, don't write about that, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? And you kind of like, in your subconscious mind, that kind of just absorbs much faster. So my writing kind of changed in the middle, and then I came back to being, let me write what I want to write, and then hopefully it will find readers that are like-minded or would want to read this. So it's been a long journey. It's been 10 years.
But first of all, I think we should stop here for a second and wish you a belated happy birthday.
Thank you.
The milestone that you've reached. And I don't think people stop telling you how to write, what to write, and what not to write, even though you might go into your 40s as we are.
We were just joking about this yesterday. I was with my friends, and I was saying, they were asking, does anything feel different? And I was like, yeah, because when I was younger, when I was 19, most of my readers were older than me. And then slowly that has shifted, because my readership is like college students and like young, like 25, 30 years old, under 30, mostly up to 35. But then I could just be like, respect your elders. Now that I'm older, but like, don't talk back to me.
Don't say that, yeah. Wonderful. Oh, I'm so glad.
It starts to matter less what other people are saying.
You can actually just, kind of shut off and think this is white noise and I don't really need to. Yes, but then people never stop. So you already got that experience. So let's end this session with what's your favorite quote or song?
In my book, there's this one full quote that we took from my, there's an author's note to begin with. And at the end, I did this epilogue. It's called Mirror, Mirror. And in that, because with the novel, you always get to tie loose ends and sort of zoom out from somebody's life and go back into it 6 months later, a year later or something. So I wanted that for this book, but it's a collection of stories, and you really at the end of a story don't want to force feed people, this is how you should think. So I wanted it to be at the very end, people can read it or not. That tied loose ends together. That was really fun to write. And I think there I did this whole thing about in the end, in the mirror, this person sees this at the end of the day. And so then it comes down to like mine, because the last story is about me. And then I said at the very end, I say, when I look in the mirror, I see a person who dreams. And I think that has been a struggle for the past couple of years, especially with COVID and being kind of stranded in a new country alone. I just moved to Montreal a few months before COVID happened, and I was alone for a long time. And then all the stuff that you've been running away from kind of comes back and all that stuff. So I think dreaming still and not forgetting that it's so easy to just do your job every day, watch TV, eat food, go to sleep, and then do it again till you die, basically over and over again. So it's very easy to get into that comfort. But for me, dreaming can become a nightmare, because when you think about if there are dreams and no actions, then they can turn on you. And so that kind of reminds me to keep working towards what I want, and it will be uncomfortable, and not be afraid of, taking risks and all that stuff. And that's how I feel about love also, because I remember interviewing a couple for my job one time, and they just seemed like they didn't like each other, and they were maybe 70 at that point. And I turned to my friend and I said, well, why do people get married if they don't like each other? And then he said that I think it's because they stop doing fun things. So while you're courting, while you're like dating, whatever, getting married and all that stuff, there's still activity, there's also fun, all these different things you're doing. But then you get complacent, and then you live the same day over and over again till you die. So it's important to dream still, and it's important to not let that turn into a nightmare. So that's just a long way of saying that that's the emotion that I have been feeling the most recently, the past couple of years. That's been at the surface for me, that if I want to go somewhere, I have to take myself there. I can't just sit here and dream and have no action.
Yeah.
So
wonderful. That was a very nice way of putting it. And the truth of it is that love and romance is something that cannot stagnate. It should not stagnate. It has to evolve, or at least it has to move to be viable. And it's like a heartbeat on the monitor. It will dip and rise, and that is how you know that it is alive. So when two people remain the same, how can, they don't remain the same. They grow and they evolve and they change. And then how can love and romance remain the same? Right. So it was great talking to you, Nikita. I'm so glad that I got this opportunity. Thank you so much, Times Litfest, for giving us this platform. And I wish you a great evening ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was a wonderful conversation. And thank you, Times Litfest. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for watching today's sessions. Please join us tomorrow between 5 to 7 p.m. to watch our upcoming sessions. We will start a session with author and columnist Chetan Bhagat, who will be talking about his latest book, 400 Days, with Nandini Sen Mehra, winner of the Ruel International Poetry Prize 2020 for Best Upcoming Poet. Next, we will be in an explosive session with Siddharth Malia, who will be talking about his book, If I'm Honest, with author and journalist Jyotsna Mohan. Lastly, author and pediatrician Nadia Hashimi will be in conversation with Swati Daftor, Senior Commissioning Editor for Popular Fiction at HarperCollins India. Also, don't forget to talk about us on your social media handles by using the hashtag TimesLitFest.